Welcome back to The Agenda with the Missoula County Commissioners. I'm Josh Slotnick, and I'm here with my fellow commissioners, Dave Strohmeyer and Juanita Vero. Today we are joined by a guest who is also a fan of the podcast. Can you imagine that?
Is this the first one?
It might be.
My first fan to become guest transition.
Yes.
Right here. Would you introduce yourself, good sir?
Thank you, Josh. My name is Andy Kulla, and I am a fan. I mean, it's like the Agenda, Bob Dylan, Tom Petty, John Mayer,
John Prine. Can we get
John Prine?
Yeah,
John Prine for sure. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
And I appreciate getting to be here. I worked on the Lolo National Forest for 30 years in recreation management, and then for the last 20 years of my career, I was a National Recreation Area and Wilderness Manager for the Rattlesnake.
Wow.
And I wrote the management plan for it in 92. And I'm not tooting my own horn. I'm just saying that I'm pretty familiar with it and I know a little bit about it.
It's a good thing because you are here today to talk about the rattlesnake.
And this is nothing about me. It's nothing about Andy. This is about the resource. This is about the rattlesnake and what it means to Missoula.
Let's just dive right in. Let's roll back the clock to, I don't know, the Ice Age, wherever you want to start. Talk to us about this gem that we have come to know as the rattlesnake.
Well, as we talk about the rattlesnake history and culture, it's almost like a summary of civilization. It's a story of love and loss, recovery, built and burnt bridges, literally, healing, learning, that we can't grow complacent and take things for granted, and that we've accomplished can always be taken away when we're no longer tend and protect what's dear to us. So when you think about the history of the rattlesnake, you got to think about the history of the Missoula Valley. Take yourself back to 1860. Back at that time, C.P. Higgins and Francis Warden opened a trading post called Hellgate Village on the Blackfoot River near the eastern edge of the valley. It was the first white settlement in the valley. By 1866, the settlement had moved 5 miles upstream and had been renamed Missoula Mills, later shortened to Missoula. The mills provided...
Credit to Higgins' wife.
Really? The original settlement was
her
it
idea.
Close to the confluence of the Blackfoot and the Clarkport?
Yeah, originally...
So it wasn't in the valley?
No, it was called Hellgate Village on the Blackfoot near the eastern edge of the valley. The Salish name for the area, and forgive me for the pronunciation, Ni Missoula Taku, from which the word and the name Missoula was derived. So back then, we're back at 1866 and forward, the rattlesnake was the closest and easiest drainage to get the natural resources that civilization needed. Firewood, railroad ties, and with those came splash dams by which they were floated down to the town. They floated thousands of cords of firewood and railroad ties down the creek. Drinking water, that was a big one, and dams to support drinking water supplies. There was a lime kiln up there that provided lime for concrete in town and whitewashing, which seals wood and protects from the elements.
Andy, I didn't mean to interrupt. Does that mean they were mining lime up there? And
Yes.
then burning. And then making... What's the kiln process on lime? I don't know what you mean there.
The manufacturing of lime is something I do not know.
But it gets baked in a kiln.
There's a site up there called the Lime Kiln,
Okay.
which is currently a hole in the ground with some artifacts around it, and there's about a 2-mile road going up there from Beast Cove Creek, still in place. Exactly how they did that, I don't know. There was even a gold mine. There were 19, people call them homesteads, but they're maybe farmsteads. They weren't properly homesteaded.
Oh, in terms of the Homestead Act.
Yeah.
Just squatting, basically.
Yeah, a lot of those came from squatting, and some of them where they were squatting, they found out that they didn't own them, and they had to rebuy them from the Montana Power Company in the early 1900s.
Did the Montana Power Company own most of the valley?
Montana Power Company owned 21,000 acres of checkerboard ownership up there. So if you looked at it, it was Montana Power Company Forces, Montana Power Company, and that was the straw that broke the camel's back that got the fire started.
And Power Company was interested in that land for access to the water, for a dam to make electricity, or was it drinking water? What was the resource they were interested in?
Water.
For all the above. Power and drinking.
Yeah, they never generated power, although there was at one point a dam proposed about 2 3/4 miles up, which is on a topographic feature known as the Hog's Back. And there was a proposal at one point to build a dam across it.
Wow.
And dam up the
And
whole
make
drainage.
power.
Wow.
Yeah, that didn't go over too well. Didn't happen.
Appreciate that.
When was that proposal, or like ballpark? What?
That was pre my time. I cannot.
But like in the 50s, like.
I couldn't accurately give you a date on that.
Okay.
Andy, so one of the places I have a yearly expedition to his Poe Meadow. I go up there, annual camp out with some friends every year. And you mentioned homesteaders or squatters over the years. Would that location be a part of that group of folks who lived up there, I'm assuming?
Yep. And actually, I'll talk a little more about Forrest and his father, who lived up there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they were a key part of that history, documented and saved some of it in a self-published book called Life in the Rattlesnake. And then there's subsequent oral histories that are available through the University of Montana, in which he and his wife Flossie tell stories of the life up the rattlesnake.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he was a key character. There were these 19 farmsteads, homesteads. The drainage had mail and newspaper delivery. There was a hunting lodge. There were telephone lines. In 1919, a man-caused wildfire wiped out the whole drainage.
1919.
My understanding from the recordings of Forrest Poe is that only 2 home farmsteads burned.
2 that burned did not attend to the home ignition zone.
They didn't
around.
have metal roofs.
And there was, of course, motorized on and off roads use.
So in time period you're talking about, do you imagine people driving early vehicles up the gut of the
Oh,
rattlesnake?
yeah. There were people that lived up there that worked in town. Yeah, toward the end of this period, about 1935, 1936, Montana Power Company bought out all of these home/farmsteads.
Would the folks sell voluntarily?
They were eager to sell. I mean, back then cash was skinny. I mean, nobody had cash. Nobody dealt in cash. It was all trade. It was all barter. It was all services. So the idea of coming in for, I think I read of one of them selling for like $3,000 or $3,500. Big money.
Big money. Okay.
Big money. And cash money.
Yeah.
Yeah, sell out, get the money, move to town. So the settlers did everything you could do to the land, and with that came pretty high impact. And not to make judgment, that was the context of the era. While all of this was pretty much individual impact and the work of one person or small groups of people from about 1840 to the 1970s, what you could kind of call maybe the final straw came in the 1970s when Montana Power Company began industrial large-scale logging and road building in the drainage. And you can actually see some relics of that in what is now currently the Rattlesnake Wilderness.
Oh, wow.
In Lower Lake Creek and Wrangell Creek.
So they were logging up there.
Yeah.
Industrial scale logging.
Yeah.
Was there any popular response to that?
Yes.
Wait, how did we get the name Rattlesnake? Because
Oh, yeah. How
The most likely name story is that a person was bitten by a snake while gathering firewood along the creek and died. A grave marker indicated how the person died but was destroyed by railroad construction, which suggests that the person was buried down by the confluence of Rattlesnake Creek and the Clark Fork where the railroad is.
Damn railroads.
John Mullen came through, and who was an Army surveyor, 1853, 1854, and he named the creek Observation Creek. However, a few years later, in 1860, a map shows it as both Observation Creek and Rattlesnake Creek.
okay.
So that supports multiple stories on name sources.
Andy, you mentioned industrial scale logging and road building in the Rattlesnake in the 1970s. The 1970s was really, one could argue, was a high point of environmentalism in the United States, thinking about Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, things like that, where care for the environment was seen as really a bipartisan issue for probably its first and only time. So was there a popular backlash within Missoula to industrial scale logging and road building in what is now the Rattlesnake Wilderness area?
Yes, and that's what sparked the movement to get the area designated.
What happened?
Well, I'll tell you. Take yourself back to the 1970s. Missoula was a freewheeling, real friendly town, Arbor Day parties, cowboys and hippies drinking side by side, loving and fighting at the Stockman and Top Hat. A group formed in town called the Friends of the Rattlesnake.
All right.
The movement spread throughout the community and to Washington, D.C. to save the snake.
What year are we talking about, roughly?
This is mid-1970s to 1980.
And do you mind rattling off just a few of the names of the people who might have been central to this group?
Kaczynski.
And you. Those are the two names that I associate with this, but...
And Cass
from
didn't do
memory
it
here.
for personal recognition or personal credit.
No, it's his passion.
It was his passion. It was the land. It was the spirit. It was nature.
Yeah. Were there others?
Friends of the Rattlesnake had a lot of members. One of them was Dr. Bill Brown.
the veterinarian?
Yep.
Nice job.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Even going backwards, you know everyone. It's just amazing.
I'm sure Smoke had a push in it, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Was,
Smoke Elser.
But so this group got together. What was the mayor, the city council? What was the kind of energy, political energy
Everybody-
in Missoula at the time? Because then you ended up going to D.C.
The community support was widespread. I can't name individual political people beyond freshman Congressman Pat Williams, who embraced it. It was Pat Williams who actually carried it through Congress.
So from the point in time when Pat Williams and maybe others in Congress started working on the legislation to when it got over the finish line, were there changes that happened there?
Yep. There were changes that came through. It wasn't the Forest Service idea to do it.
Oh, really?
It was not a kumbaya moment.
Yeah. Well, Andy, what was the pushback?
The pushback was that, remember, logging and development was king at that time?
Yes, sir.
I mean, I
Yeah,
worked in
yeah.
Superior at that time, and logging was king. That's what was happening, and the idea of not doing it had
I was here in the mid-'80s, and
pushback.
logging was king then. In the Reagan era, and James Watt, I think cut it, burn it, pave it was the mantra for how the West should be treated.
It's interesting to note that the two wilderness areas, the Welcome Creek Wilderness and the Rattlesnake Wilderness on the Missoula Ranger District, both became designated as wilderness areas as a result of specific citizen efforts to stop logging.
And were both of those, I'd heard this, I don't know if it's true, but with Welcome Creek, maybe the same thing with the Rattlesnake, that the creation of the wilderness area was attached to another piece of legislation, that the political climate of earmarks, encouraging folks from different parties to cooperate so they could each get something they want that might not affect the other, played a real role in at least Welcome Creek. I wonder if something like that played a role in the creation of the Rattlesnake.
Well, they had actually already built a road into Welcome Creek to log it. Forest Service had. Well, that's how close it got, and it was stopped the Welcome Creek Road. You can still walk in. You know, like all political movements, it's a push and a pull and a compromise, and that's not bad. That's how it works. You know, everybody. One of my bosses once told me, Andy, it's better to have half a pie than no pie. You know, and that's good. That's all right. That's how we should be working.
So in the case of the rattlesnake, was the pie of the wilderness larger to begin with and it got scaled back, or?
My belief is they got well over half a pie.
Okay.
And was it attached to anything else? Was there an earmark for, I'm just saying, guessing, like somebody got a bridge in Pennsylvania and we got the Rattlesnake Wilderness Area?
There's no indication of that.
It was a standalone.
The
deal.
Rattlesnake Act of 1980 came down as a standalone act, not as an attachment or a rider or anything to anything else. It was hard fought, clean and dirty. There were a lot of alpha males butting heads. There was eco-terrorism.
Eco-terrorism.
Burning bridges, literally.
Describe.
Literally
Yeah,
burning
please.
bridges. Franklin Bridge, milepost
Yes.
8. You've been there.
I've been there.
Beautiful concrete bridge.
Absolutely.
You know why that's a concrete
No.
bridge? Because it was a wooden bridge. And an unknown person/persons went up there at that time and burned down the Franklin Bridge to stop logging.
Oh, so it was a bridge that carried logging gear.
It was a bridge that went all the way up the corridor to the
But
end.
you could have drove a big truck with gear on it. It wasn't a footbridge.
No, it was a road bridge.
So they burned down a road bridge to stop logging.
And, you know, in civilization's wisdom and learning, they said, well, we'll just put in a concrete bridge. Problem solved.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was very emotionally charged.
I remember when Earth First had their newspaper coming out of Missoula.
Oh, there was tree spiking going on. There was all
Yeah.
kinds of stuff
Remember
going on back then.
newspapers? It was a thing you held.
I've heard of such
Yeah.
things. Yeah.
Ink on your fingers.
Ink on your
Yeah.
fingers.
To this day, some of the parties that had a part in its designation and its current management, they'll have a strong dislike for each other. I mean,
Wow.
these were deeply burned scars, you might say.
Were there people who were on the same side generally? They wanted Rattlesnake being made a wilderness, but disagreed on strategy and then caused a rift there?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, even between the Friends of the Rattlesnake and Pat Williams, there was dissent over the final wording. The Congressional Committee report from September 1980, the month before the act was passed, explicitly spelled out that it was closed to development, logging, grazing, resources extraction, very explicit pointed language that addressed the intent of the effort to get it designated. But by the time next month it had gotten to Congress for the passage of the act in October of 1980, the Forest Service and other parties had had a hand in homogenizing the language to where it was not that explicit. But the intent was very well known to the community and to the Lolo Forest.
So we're talking about the wilderness, but there's also this thing called the National Recreation Area. And is that something that was there at the very beginning of work on this piece of legislation, or did that evolve over time?
Well, it morphed, as many of these efforts go, Welcome Creek included, they start out as a movement or an effort for preservation, and they morph and they go through all these, like in Welcome Creek, they never started wanting it to be a wilderness. They just wanted to stop the logging. But by the time it went through all of the push, pull, political mechanisms, compromise, it ended up a wilderness. It's interesting to note that the Rattlesnake was originally called the National Recreation and Education Area.
I've never heard of an area with that designation.
Yeah, it was called the NREA.
What about it would be educational?
Well, the principle was that it was so close to Missoula, the idea to let nature be the healer, because it's unusual that the Forest Service will go into a heavily impacted area and just back off and let it heal. More typically, and appropriately in a lot of cases, they'll go in with equipment and kind of speed up the process.
Take out a road or something.
Take out a road, do some, back in those days, taking out a road was sacrilege. There was a time in the 1970s when the Forest Service actually had a program called pre-roading. With pre-roading, it wasn't the Forest Service did it, Congress directed them, but Congress gave the Forest Service money specifically to road areas that didn't have roads. They were directed to find large tracts of unroaded land, and then the problem was defined for that large tract as it didn't have a road.
Not that it had trees that were of value or some other resource, just go build roads.
Well, the trees didn't hurt a bit because what they did is they gave the Forest Service money to locate these areas and go build roads with congressionally appropriated money, and that was the project, and that fixed the problem, which was it didn't have any roads. And then the Forest Service could go in and put in a timber sale with these existing roads, but the timber didn't have to pay for the roads. And even now, what the Forest Service calls backcountry was never...
And for folks who are wondering, Andy is using air quotes around backcountry as we speak.
Thank you. What is called now backcountry in the 86 Forest Plan and in the proposed action for the revised plan is just the areas they didn't get to back then because there was so much of them. They were like the leftovers.
Too far away.
Just didn't have enough time. They were on the list but never got to it. Because once the impacts of the heavy logging in the 70s and 80s became apparent and the environmental regulation things that came out after that, pre-roading went away. That was no longer a program.
It was funding that was lost, or a philosophical change, or what happened?
Both.
Okay.
And it wasn't the Forest Service that decided we should pre-road this. Remember, these are things that Congress directed the Forest Service to do. This was the institutional thinking. In the 60s, the idea of clear cutting was a good idea because it was economical. You get a whole lot out with one big line.
Yeah.
In the 60s, it was best science. Clear cuts were thought to imitate and duplicate fire.
Yeah.
Right.
We found they're different, and that's okay. We always work on our best known science at the time, and you can't really judge past things by current values. It's just different.
That's well said.
It's just different.
Can you go back to the education component of the title?
Well, there was actually, when the legislation was first developed and shortly after passage, there was talk of building an educational center. Like a big building up there to be an education place. But with the emphasis
around natural history or what?
Nature. This word was vague, but nature as the healer, nature as the teacher. It's the wind, it's the water, it's the soil, it's the spirit of the snake. So when the designation came down in 1980, it was a big deal. Through the sheer will and spirit of Missoula, the snake received the highest level of protection and recognition for the primitive, undeveloped recreation resource in Montana. The recreation resource in the snake had been recognized on the same level as wildness and solitude is recognized for wilderness areas under the Wilderness Act.
Wow.
According to the law, the primitive, undeveloped recreation resource in the rattlesnake is the best that there is in all of Montana.
Andy, when you think about the rattlesnake now, there's this big parking lot, trailhead, bunch of trails. In 1980, when this thing was made real, was some of that there, or did all of that follow?
That followed the designation in 1980.
So the Forest Service built the parking lot, put in trails?
The
Were some of
parking
those
lot,
trails
the main
pioneered?
trailhead was so controversial
Really?
that there were over 30 alternatives on the table at one point.
What was controversial?
Everything.
Then you have people
the
coming in.
size, the location, the design. There was so much micro concern over overdevelopment.
My goodness.
And so who are
Given
some
the
of the-
level of use that place gets right now on a sunny Saturday, I wonder what the grandparents of the Rattlesnake would have to say when you go up there and it's completely full of cars and cars down over the bridge and people biking up through whatever trail that is through the neighborhood below to get there. I mean, it's just packed with humanity. Wonder how to put you in that, one of the grandparents. Does it feel like, oh my goodness,
Well, it would,
except,
except, there's magic to the snake. There's a spirit of the snake. And one of the things that differentiates the snake from what's called concentrated recreation, which is when you go to Blue Mountain in the parking lot's full, the hillside looks like ants.
Yes.
You go to Patty Canyon when everything's packed, and you go out there and you see people. But one of the amazing things that you find about the snake is that when its parking lot's full, you go up there and you go a mile or two in, and where is everybody? There's so much by
It holds
topography.
people well.
It absorbs people well and naturally offers a experience of solitude and primitive undeveloped recreation.
Are you concerned that we're loving it to death in terms of impact and use?
Yes, I am concerned about that, and it should have its own management area like it does now and like Wilderness does, which is the only other congressionally designated area on the forest in the state, but that it's going to need not only the current standards but additional protective standards to protect it in the future as the population grows,
Yes.
as pressure on
Right.
national forest recreation grows, as the impacts of public recreation on national forest
The
grows.
destructive force now is not industrial logging and road building. It's humans wanting to get their yayas out.
Now, the area, if you think about it, it's this roughly 62,000 acre block. The southern part of that is the Rattlesnake National Recreation Area. That's approximately 28,000 acres.
And this is the area that most people recreate in when they go to the Rattlesnake.
And Andy, why was that chosen to be a national recreation area as opposed to simply expanding the boundaries of the wilderness? Was it because it was already roaded to some extent, or?
Well, there was roads into the wilderness already. You know, other than hypothesizing, I can't speak directly to that, how that
a good
division
question.
came down.
Was it just like kind of the phasing into the wilderness?
Well, the
Proximity to
National
Missoula?
Recreation Area, when it was designated, was intended to be a transition zone between the wilderness and Missoula.
Civilization, yeah. So what are the things that can happen in a national recreation area that can't happen in a wilderness?
There's no mechanized equipment allowed in a wilderness. It's not light-handed management. It's no management other than things as simple as trail building. It's managed for a setting and appearance that is, quote, according to the Wilderness Act, untrammeled by man, where the signs of man and development and management are not apparent.
Wait, are e-bikes allowed in the NRA?
No.
Okay.
The Forest Service, fortunately, still classifies e-bikes as motorized vehicles, which they are.
I saw a sign in Sawmill Gulch just a few days ago that said no e-bikes.
Gotcha. Okay. So you can ride your bike to the wilderness area.
I rode my acoustic bike right by that sign. Would some of the, and excuse this as a question out of ignorance, but I'm just coming from a place of being aware that people are very spooked about the potential for catastrophic fire burning homes and businesses in the Missoula Valley. Think of what happened in California in Paradise, or like the Camp Fire, or in Talent, Oregon. Are those sorts of viewpoints having an influence on the Forest Service, and people are saying, well, we really need to do much more active management in that recreation area because it's so close to town, because if it burns, we could get ember showers in Missoula and everybody's house goes down. So we got to really get into that 28,000 acres and actively manage it with big, heavy gear, or else. Is that part of the conversation, or am I just projecting?
No, that's what I call the Chicken Little argument. The sky is falling.
So people
if
aren't
we don't,
making that. I'm not making it. I'm just guessing.
Oh, yeah,
it's
that's
being
very
made.
popular with the Forest Service. I mean, and it's not only popular within the Forest Service, but there's legislation, there's money in the Infrastructure or Inflation Reduction Act specifically for that. They're directed to do that.
For forest management or fuels mitigation or something like that?
There's a tremendous number of terms that the Forest Service has for logging. I mean, it's almost like for my whole career, they tried to find a word that would make logging palatable. There was new perspectives, there was ecosystem management, there was a new paradigm.
Fiber supply.
Fuel reduction, a number of them. There's a number.
Veg management.
Vegetation management.
So are you saying those things, managing a forest, it's not real? It's not something that should be done?
No, I'm not at all an anti-logging person. I think that there is a place for logging in the National Forest. But the National Recreation Area isn't it because of the intent of the act.
I see.
And
that's an important distinction.
It's a huge distinction. And the importance of letting nature be the teacher and the healer. Now that sounds kind of cosmic and out there and all, but that's what it is, and that's how this came about, and that's something that we have to confront.
So,
that's what I call the spirit of the snake.
Okay, so I just got to ask this kind of more philosophical question. Let's say we were to go backwards. You talked about 1860, or back maybe even a little further. There were human beings living on this landscape in a way that wasn't destructive as we understand destruction to be now. I have heard that folks who were living here then actively burned parts of the forest. They were doing essentially a version of forest management to meet some of their needs for game and for other things. Would you say human beings in 1820 living here in small bands were not in nature?
Well, two things there I would suggest is, number one, people back then were acting more individually and just didn't have the capacity or the capability for the large-scale environmental impact that came with mechanized equipment, with yarders, with...
they didn't have the tools.
They just didn't have the...
gear. They didn't have the gear.
Or
and
the numbers.
Tools.
Yeah.
Or the numbers.
Yeah.
Pre-1860, there weren't even any white people here. This is just what I've heard. I'm in no way even pretending to be an authority. I'd heard that those folks who are living here, native people, used fire to, quote, manage the forest to meet some of their own needs. And would that be considered nature, given those folks were here indigenously in the same way that deer and elk were here wild and indigenously?
Well, in the Natural Resource Forest Service business, there's like this line in time called pre-settlement.
Okay.
And that is a pre-settlement era. And when they talk about the condition of the forest pre-settlement, it's when the native people were living and managing it, and that's considered a part of nature in the natural resource dialogue on what is natural versus post-settlement. So when they talk about recreating a pre-settlement condition, it includes that use of fire by native people.
Thank you.
And I think arguably, and this might be a little different than what you're saying, Andy, but there is a cultural aspect to the landscape, even pre-European settlement. But it's perhaps qualitatively and quantitatively different than post-settlement era manipulation of the landscape, which still has its imprint of culture upon it, but in a way that is much more disruptive of those natural systems.
Yeah, although there's a lot of stuff coming out now to make it less disruptive. I mean, when you talk about current day Forest Service logging, it's a whole different world, and you can't bunch it with we used to, in those days, all it was about is what you're going to take out of the forest. When you marked a timber sale, I remember my first job with the Forest Service was marking timber sales in the Sierras, where they had these big 4 and 5 foot ponderosa and Jeffrey pines we called the pickles. And when you went out to lay out a unit, you went for the pickles. That's what you were there. You were there to get the volume, to get the big ones, and leave what they used to call a crap tree release, where you leave the crummiest, worst to take the highest value. That's completely opposite now. When you see current Forest Service logging, it is hugely enlightened compared to that, not only in terms of looking at what are you going to leave for a healthy forest, but the considerations for wildlife, for fish, for water quality, for
and the
all
equipment is totally enlightened as well. It's completely different than what it was.
Yeah, so
in the 80s.
Yeah. And I don't mean to make a value judgment on pre-settlement management versus post-settlement management. I'm just trying to say here's what it is and here's what we got. But it's greatly improved.
I was just trying to get to when you said nature be the healer, what that really meant.
What that means in the spirit of the snake is to leave it alone and let it heal. And it really has done that. I mean, you go up the Snake today, you would have no idea that it had been heavily cut over for railroad ties, for firewood, that it had roads, that it had a big fire, that it had mines, that it had people running up and down the creek literally shooting each other.
Wow. Yeah.
It was a wild and woolly place.
So the protection that you and Cass in 1976, what's the date?
Well, the act
When you
was
guys got-
1980.
Okay, but when you guys got together, when the Friends of the Rattlesnake got together.
I don't claim credit for anything in the 70s. That was completely Cass's thing.
Okay, well, I guess what I'm getting at is, do you think such an effort could be successful today?
It's already.
Current climate.
I mean, for a new area? You know, with the divisive politics and this politics of hatred and misinformation and the internet, if we were to start on that today, boy, that'd be a wild card. You know, it was different then. You know, there was spirit, there was unity, there was movements, the whole condition of the environment. Remember, we had rivers that caught on fire.
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of polluted. Yeah. You know, I mean, it was a different thing then. And there weren't these tools that we have now for misinformation.
So, Andy, I guess thinking about how we move forward into the future with planning of these wildlands and what they ought to look like for future generations, be that the Rattlesnake Wilderness, the National Recreation Area, or any other place. Let's just for a brief moment go back to 1980. So you mentioned that the Forest Service wasn't necessarily at the tip of the spear when it came to planning. But how did so Congress acted. Then what? How did the agency respond at that point?
Well, like I said, it wasn't kumbaya. It was a push-pull. It was a hard knockdown, drag-out fight. October 1980, Act passed. The intent and spirit was very clear in the minds of the Lolo National Forest. Lolo National Forest then began working on one of the first forest plans in the country.
When was the Rattlesnake Recreation Area open as a recreation area?
As soon as the act was passed.
They didn't have to build the trailhead and
No, the first
put
thing
in
they did
bathrooms.
was closed it to motorized use.
And that happened immediately.
That happened right in there, a hair before or after.
Then you said there was a fight about the trailhead.
There was controversy.
It didn't just happen where the...
No, it was deep, and what the fight was against overdevelopment. That's what the issues were, is that the proponents of the act and the community did not want it overdeveloped.
What do you mean overdeveloped for recreation?
Too big, too surfaced, too many structures. A little known fact is that the first 0.6 of a mile of Road 99, the trail that goes up from the parking lot
The main corridor.
up to Schoolhouse Junction, the first 0.6 of a mile was designated to be a wheelchair accessible trail and to be surfaced suitable for wheelchair travel. That was so controversial that when the Forest Service engineers were out there doing the surfacing and widening it to I think it's 6 feet or something for wheelchairs.
It's pretty wide.
Members of the public, FOR, were out there with a ruler measuring to make sure that they didn't make it too thick and overdevelop it. I mean, it was a hot deal. So take that atmosphere and think about, now we're going to build a trailhead here. What's it going to look like? Well, it ain't going to be paved. It ain't going to have big buildings. It ain't going to have a lot. And it is what it is.
Eventually, the Forest Service came around to some extent.
So they embedded the intent of it firmly in the 1986 Lolo National Forest Plan. I came on in 1989. In 1992, I wrote the Rattlesnake National Recreation Area and Wilderness Limits of Acceptable Change-Based Management Direction. You might think of it as the management plan.
Sure.
And then from there, the 1992 LAC plan that I described in longer term was amended into that and became part of the Lolo National Forest Plan. And it added additional prescriptive standards to protect the primitive, undeveloped recreation resource with things such as trail standards for maintenance, for width, for condition, campsite density, condition, a number of people encounters to group size encounters to protect solitude, all these sorts of things. It was like the model then for how you manage change.
So
and the principle was that you knew change was going to happen, but you would identify thresholds, and when those thresholds were met and exceeded, then you took management actions to bring it back to that threshold. I mean, the real heroes on this thing isn't me. It was the people who came in to work every single day, rolled up their sleeves, and got their hands dirty with the resource. It was the people like Jack Fisher, my predecessor on the Missoula District, people like Joe Kippett, Gene Thompson, Bruce Johnson, Milo McLeod with the cultural issues. These are the people who got down and did the real work of it. These were Forest Service people who took this intent and took these standards and made sure that they were implemented on the ground.
So for folk who might be listening who capture that or understand or have a glimpse of the spirit of the snake, what would you tell them as far as ways in which they might both nurture that spirit and also contribute as a community to making sure that those core values of the rattlesnake remain for not only now but years to come?
That's a great question. Andy, so many of the people listening to this will be asking that very same thing, kind of what can I do?
The Lolo Forest Plan has a proposed action out, and the comment period on it closed yesterday. What can people do? They're trying to revise the plan that was put in place in 86 and 92 to protect the primitive, undeveloped recreation resource.
But to be fair, you've said that, I mean, it's kind of this top-down cookie-cutter approach. That it wasn't actually generated from folks on the ground making these sort of recommendations.
Now, how did this happen? Well, back in 86, in 80 and 86, when the forest plan was written, and after that, the Lolo Forest was made up of long-tenured forest supervisors, specialists, district people who had deep relationships with the community, so that when conflict situations arose, they approached them as friends and said, "Hey, Josh, this isn't going too well. What can we do?" And they worked it out. Just cooperatively worked on things because they knew each other. They had deep relationships in the community. They had staff that knew the land really well. The heroes in the 86 plan were conservationists like Greg Munther, who wrote the standards for the fish and who still now is a world-class conservationist. Mike Hillis, who watched out for the wildlife. Skip Rosequist, who watched out for the water. Milo McLeod, who was on board for the archaeological. These people got down, wrote the hard standards, and made it work, but they were long-tenured relationships in the community. They knew the resource. Now, unfortunately, the Forest Service, through budget cuts and pressure, I'm not going to fault them. They're not evil people. They're getting a lot of pressure to be pulled in a lot of different ways. They don't have tenured people. They don't have people on the ground who know it. The Lolo Forest Plan Revision Team consists of this cyber strike team who is technically very capable in writing forest plans that comply with the 2012 planning rule.
So we may need to do a part 2 at some
I think we
point.
got to do a part 2.
We got to do a part 2.
Can I finish with what people can do?
Yes.
Yeah.
They can get involved. The forest plan is layered and has 6 plan components. When I first looked at the plan, I didn't know which side was up, front, back. I was like, what? And it was only through chance that I got onto it because another conservation group asked me to review the plan for them. And I was overwhelmed, so I just said, I'm going to take a little piece of real estate like the NRA that I know about and see what it says there. So you can get involved. Get involved in a local recreation group. That's good. But try not to get into a recreation group that's winner take all. I'm in the ski club. To hell with everything else. I'm in the mountain bike club. I want trails for bikes everywhere. Try not to get in that. Remember that we got to share our cookies, and the way that this thing is going to work is that we got to work together. We got to work together.
Is there a recreation group that you recommend?
Well, the group that I think is best suits the general conservation philosophy being protect public access to public land, keeping public lands public, and maintaining quality fish and wildlife habitat is the backcountry hunters and anglers.
Is there still a Friends of the Rattlesnake?
Well, they've kind of re-fired up with this proposed action. There's not as many of them. They're long in the tooth. I'm working with them. They're talking. They've commented. Get involved with recreation groups. Write advocacy letters to your representatives at the state and federal levels explaining that the rattlesnake is important to you. Insist on clear and accountable standards and goals like are in the 86 plan and 92 LAC direction, and insist accountability and clarity in the revised plan.
We are running out of time, but we're going to have to do another one. So before we close, can you share with us a good book you've read, nugget of wisdom?
Well, I'm all about conservation and music. I've spent my life in the mountains. My favorite place is the middle of nowhere. We spend time on the ocean. I call it waterness. It's the same as wilderness, but with the topography below you. I read a lot of garbage, cops and robbers stuff, but I've also read some good books that mean something to me. There's a cops and robber author named Scott Turow, and he's written probably 10 or more books, and aside from the cops and robbers stories, his insight into human behavior and human motivation in his characters is just incredible. Some of the books, I guess, on these topics, one that should be required reading for anybody that lives in Missoula is Indian Creek Chronicles.
Yeah,
By
good
Peter
one.
Fromm, about a University of Montana student who gets his winter job to go up and tend some salmon fry. That's a keeper. Another fantastic book I really appreciated was called Hand Loggers by W.H. Jackson. And Hand Loggers is a story of a young man in California in the early 1900s who goes up to a logging camp in Oregon, meets a guy who wants to go gold mining in Alaska, and he ends up hand logging the islands in southwestern Canada and then Alaska. What you did is you go along by boat and you look at all the timber on these islands that is hanging over the water, and you go to Ketchikan or Sitka or somewhere and you get a contract from the mill for 5 million board feet of clear spruce, and you spend all summer dropping these logs into the ocean, yarding them up in a bay to make a giant raft, and at the end of the summer you call the mill who holds the contract and say, I'm done. They come up with a tug and take away. But the one thing that Jackson said, which was really good, he said the one thing that ruined wild places in the West more than anything was maps. He was there when the maps first came out, and it ruined it. He said before that, only the people who lived on the land, knew the land intimately, knew the places, and all of a sudden, all these people could come in there.
People still say that
And now
today.
we have electronic maps.
Yes.
Thanks so much, Andy. We really appreciate you coming in and sharing some of your wisdom and knowledge of this place that we all love and call home.
Well, I wouldn't call it wisdom. I'd call it, I've made a lot of mistakes, but I try not to make them twice.
Good advice. Thanks so much, Andy.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to The Agenda. If you enjoy these conversations, it would mean a lot if you'd rate and review the show on whichever podcast app you use.
And if you know a friend who would like to keep up with what's happening in local government, be sure to recommend this podcast to them.
The Agenda with the Missoula County Commissioners is made possible with support from Missoula Community Access Television, better known as MCAT, and our staff in the Missoula County Communications Division.
If you have a question or a topic you'd like us to discuss on a future episode, email it to communications@missoulacounty.us.
To find out other ways to stay up to date with what's happening in Missoula County, go to missoula.co/county updates.
Thanks for listening.